London is not a beautiful city. Under the soot that covers its buildings is a teeming mass of 4 million souls trying to survive, mostly off of each other. You see it in the paper every day. Thankfully, we have the London Times to keep us informed of all these troubling activities with an unbiased eye and razor-sharp accuracy. We find this publication to be of invaluable assistance in our investigations, and I'm sure you will as well. Among the forces of evil which run rampant in this city, there are also, thankfully, two groups of individuals who will aid us in our cause. As we do, they attempt to right wrongs and restore harmony and civility to the streets of London. The first of these groups is a ragtag association of young ruffians. I call them the Baker Street Irregulars. Don't let them fool you. They may be scruffy and ill-bred, but they are on the right side of the law. They can go everywhere, see everything, and overhear everyone. They are my eyes and ears in the streets of London, unquestionably a tremendous asset in our work. They will help us in our investigations if they can. The other group is a far more civilized collection of gentlemen and institutions. I call them the Baker Street Regulars. They, too, will be extremely useful in our work. At the start of any investigation, do keep in mind that it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Unwittingly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. The people and places to whom I will now introduce you will help us to collect the facts. May we use them wisely. Come, the game's afoot. Mr. Henry Ellis is the foreign news editor for the London Times. He is a great reservoir of information of what's happening on the continent. He also has an interest in crime news. Ellis is always happy to help when he can, but you must be careful of what you tell him, or you might find what you've confided to him in the next day's Times.
What rubbish! What balderdash!
You must have read something terribly disturbing, Watson, for you to be so overwrought this early in the morning.
Indeed, Holmes. It's irresponsible of the Times to play upon people's superstitions.
Ah, you must be referring to the affair of the mummy's curse.
Has the entire city in an uproar. 3 men dead, and they expect us to believe that the 4,000-year-old mummy was the murderer. I'm surprised you haven't taken some interest in this case, Holmes.
To the contrary, my dear Watson. I have made some inquiries, because I dare say I do believe this murderer is a much younger chap.
What rubbish! What Terribly sorry. It seems you need to turn up a clue or so more before the case can be judged. Please do continue. They had absolutely no information pertaining to this case. Oh, look. There is a note on the door that says that they will be out all afternoon. It appears we have wasted our time.
Excellent deduction, Watson. You're finally learning.
Here it is, Holmes. Egyptian mummies are embalmed bodies preserved to facilitate their resurrection. Many mummies have been found, and they are almost always the bodies of pharaohs. The pharaohs believed that one day their bodies would be brought back to life. See History of Egyptian Mummies by Pettigrew, London, 1834.
Very good, Watson.
It's quite amusing, all this hoopla over a mummy's curse, I must say. Not so amusing, of course, the murder of 3 Englishmen.
Have any of your reporters uncovered anything new?
Actually, I've been in Paris the past several weeks. Just returned to London on Tuesday. I've had no involvement with the writing of any of these articles. I believe they are all the work of Philip Travis. He's one of our young reporters. For a short time, he was the Egyptian correspondent.
Was he sacked?
No. He returned to London just a few days ago. I gather he was reassigned to cover the case from here because he had some familiarity with the murder in Egypt.
Do you know Travis?
No, never actually met the chap, although I hear he's a bit of an odd duck.
Thanks for your help, Henry.
Anytime. Let me know when you catch the mummy. That's one scoop I'd like to get.
So you've been reading my articles in the Times. I'm honored. What do you think of them?
Quite interesting. You've clearly been following the murders quite closely. Who do you suspect?
I believe it is the work of the ancient Egyptian god Pumatef and his goddess Neith.
Be serious.
I couldn't be more serious. You see, Mr. Holmes, although I am a journalist, I was actually trained as an Egyptologist. I know all about these mysteries. That's why my articles carry the force of truth.
And what is the truth, Mr. Travis?
The truth is that the Egyptians discovered the secret of life. What we call science is mere child's play compared to the knowledge they had. Look at this. Do you know what this is?
It appears to be a mummified animal of some sort, a monkey perhaps.
Precisely.
Write a conversation piece.
I've been using it in some very important experiments which, if successful, will unlock the secret to bringing back the souls of the dead. I've been working on it, Mr. Holmes, using these tanner leaves. Watch. Uma lotus. Licantina. Burura.
It appears that the soul of this particular monkey has no intention of making a reappearance.
It's only a matter of time. I know it is. After all, these secrets have been buried for thousands of years. These things don't happen overnight. But it will happen someday. This is my mission.
I believe I'll leave you to your work, Mr. Travis.
And don't go yet. Let me show you more.
Thank you. Some other time, perhaps.
There was a couple of blokes in here just a fortnight ago what mentioned the Eastern Empress. Never seen 'em before. Haven't seen 'em since. One was a swarthy fellow, Arab unless I miss my guess. The other was an old English gent. I overheard 'em say something about a bird and later caught the name of the ship. I hope that helps you. Care for a drink, yeah?
Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Sherlock Holmes, London's most overly praised amateur sleuth, needing the help of the Yard again.
Are you going to stand for that, Holmes?
Let's just see who proceeds to solve this case, Watson. Inspector Lestrade, my good man, I'm looking into the cause of James Winterbank's death.
I should have known. That murder has brought out every crank in the city. I think the professional police can wrap this one up.
All the same, could you tell us what you've discovered to date?
One dead archaeologist, no suspect, no motive.
And what of Andrew Weatherby's death? Have you looked into that?
I have talked to Captain Ramsey, but we have no leads. Look, I'm not even sure that Weatherby's murder falls into our jurisdiction. And if it doesn't, you're not going to find me worrying about it. As it is, I have enough murders to take care of.
Sorry, fellows. I don't mean to be brusque, but I am too occupied at the moment to concern myself with these so-called mummy murders. Perhaps if the mummy's solicitor were to contact me, then perhaps I would consider defending him.
Now, the thing what does strike me as odd is the passenger list of the Eastern Empress. Now, I'm not saying it has anything to do with the mummy murders, mind you, but it was a bit out of the ordinary.
What was Hogg?
Akram Palmi, for starters. He's a well-known importer, he is. For a price, a considerable price by all accounts, he can acquire whatever one's heart desires, be it jewels, art objects, or even wild animals, if that's what you fancy. I'd say he was on board that ship to transport something very valuable.
The presence of one high-powered importer on a London-bound vessel is hardly reason for suspicion.
Right-o. But Abdullah al-Saad was also on board.
Oh, yes. The well-known agent for the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire.
You never miss a trick, do you, Holmes? Well, whatever it was what Fahmy was carrying, I'd say it was something those Turks wanted to get their hands on.
Beg your pardon, but could I have a word with you, Sir Jasper?
Dr. Watson, of course. Are you investigating the death of Samuel Sneed? I just finished with him.
No, we're interested in James Windibank.
Ah, the mummy's latest victim, of course. Who hired Holmes for this one? King Tut?
Oh, that's a jolly good one. Actually, we don't have a client on this one.
Just for fun, eh? Well, about the only thing I can tell you is that that mummy has very powerful hands.
What do you mean?
The trachea was crushed along with one of the vertebrae of the neck. Death was instantaneous. Snap.
But the papers' reports say that there were mummy wrappings found round the neck.
Just window dressing. Without question, it was bare hands. The bruises and the way that the vertebrae was crushed leave no doubt about that.
Thank you very much for your time, Sir Jasper. We're very much appreciative.
Not at all, Watson. You will let me know when you've convicted the mummy.
Beg your pardon?
Well, so I can perform an autopsy on him. Would be most fascinating, don't you think?
Pettigrew wrote this book over 50 years ago, and there's still nothing better on the subject. Fascinating. Just fascinating. And what can I do for you today, Whitson?
It's Watson, sir.
Watson, yes, of course.
We're interested in what you may have learned about this mummy case.
Oh, so these days it's mummies you're chasing down with that fella Helms.
It's Holmes, sir.
That's just what I said now, isn't it, Whitson?
Yes, I believe you did, sir.
Let me show you what I found so far. This is the bit of linen that was found round the neck of James Windibank. I examined it thoroughly, and it is quite old, perhaps thousands of years. However, it is not the murder weapon.
Are you certain of that?
Aye. The linen is quite old, but it's not at all strong enough to strangle a grown man.
Very interesting, sir.
I also found something quite fascinating. Take a look through this glass. Do you see those short hairs on the fabric?
They look precisely like hairs.
Of course course they look like hairs. But what kind of hairs? They're not human hairs. They're dog hairs. Now, look at this. This piece of linen was found round the neck of the victim on board the ship. Well, his name was Leatherby or something. It is also quite old, and on it I found more hairs.
More dog hairs?
No, my dear man, monkey hairs. I've not yet been able to identify the precise species, but it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Quite. But what do you think it all means?
Well, I'm not the sort who likes to jump to conclusions, Whitson. But I can assure you that neither of these bandages were the murder weapons.
I know only a very little about two of the unfortunate gentlemen. I do recall that Turnbull was quite an eccentric chap. I don't believe he ever married, nor did he take his rightful place in London society.
And what of Windibank?
A quiet academic sort, as far as I can tell, married to a woman called Hildegard. There was one spot of controversy that I can recall. It seems a few years back he had a run-in with the Anti-Vivisectionist League.
No, but of course.
It seems that during a lecture on the advancement of science, he spoke of the autopsy of his own pet, a recently deceased Yorkshire Terrier. Well, I can tell you the Times received a great deal of letters to the editor condemning him on that one. Even one from a Louise Fenwick, who threatened to vivisect him.
Oh, dear. Well, then I surmise it's Weatherby you know nothing about.
Well, now that you mention it, I believe he was assisting Professor Windibank in that lecture series.
Mr. Turnbull apparently left what little he had to the Egyptology department at London University. And Windibank left everything to his wife Hildegard.
What about Weatherby?
Ditto. Everything was left to his wife Clarissa, although being such a young chap, it hardly seems that he had much to leave at all.
It's quite amusing, all this hoopla over a mummy's curse, I must say.
Pity. It appears that no one is in.
However can you tell, Holmes?
There is a sign on the door that says, "We are gone for the day."
How terribly observant, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
How unfortunate. There's not a soul in sight.
Pity. I'm very sorry to intrude on you in your moment of grief.
Oh, that's quite all right. You know, Andrew and I haven't been married very long.
Long enough to know if he had any enemies?
Oh, Andrew was so unassuming. Everyone liked him.
Including Mr. Rurubaru?
I really loved my husband.
I'm sure you did. Oh, English toffee. My favorite.
Would you like one?
Please.
Sorry. You'll have to open this yourself. I've never been any good with these things.
What did you learn, Watson?
Not a thing, Holmes.
You learned nothing?
Don't get testy, Holmes. Oh, look. There is a note on the door that says that they will be out all afternoon. All this way and not a clue to help us solve this case. How terribly disappointing.
Such a tragedy. Fine men all and such outstanding scholars. I still can't quite get over the shock of it.
We understand.
Professor, we're looking for background information on these three men so that we can understand how their murders might tie together.
Well, let me begin with Dr. Turnbull. Ebenezer Turnbull was responsible for organizing the Carteret expedition. Quite a remarkable man, really. This was the first time he teamed up with James Windibank. Professor Windibank was one of our most popular lecturers. In fact, several of his former students were also eager to accompany him. I recall him saying that he was having difficulty choosing. Weatherby turned out to be the lucky one, though it seems far from it now, doesn't it? I suppose Smith and Travis turned out to be the lucky ones after all.
Smith and Travis?
Peter Smith accepted the invitation to join another expedition. As for Philip Travis, he was quite keen on accompanying Professor Winterbank. In fact, he became exceedingly upset when Andrew Weatherby, a postgraduate student in the department, was chosen instead. Took it rather personally, I should say.
Sorry I can't help you, Ducky, but Mr. Smith has been out of the country since the middle of March. He's a good-looking bloke, except for the dirt under his fingernails.
They had absolutely no information pertaining to this case.
So you've been reading my articles in the Times. I'm honored.
All this way and not a clue to help us solve. Terribly sorry. It seems you need to turn up a clue or so more before the case can be judged. Please do.
We had just come through a rather grueling storm, so I sent my first officer, Luther Tenney, down into the hold to check on the condition of the cargo. He reported back post-haste that Mr. Weatherby was lying dead among the Egyptian artifacts we were transporting. I turned over the helm to Tenney and went below to have a look for myself.
And did what you see confirm Teddy's report?
Unfortunately, yes. Weatherby was lying next to that coffin, or whatever it's called, apparently strangled. I went back to the bridge and put Tenney in charge of the investigation.
And what did he uncover?
Well, you'll have to ask him for the specifics, because I can scarcely recall the details.
Let me tell you, a murder, even by a 4,000-year-old mummy, was only one odd thing in a string of bad luck on this voyage.
What sort of bad luck?
It all started with the crew, really. Seamen are a rather superstitious lot to begin with, and the idea carrying about a 4,000-year-old mummy had them shivering in their timbers. We almost faced a bloody mutiny. Then there were the passengers, a strange lot. I can tell you that reporter fellow, Travis, did us no service at all with his mystic mumbo-jumbo. He and Professor Winterbank had a regular war of words going on about whatever powers this mummy was supposed to have. And there was the two Arabs.
Arabs? Interesting. Do you recall their names?
I should hope I do. One was called Barmy. He always carried around this curious little box. No clue what was in it, but Barmy never let it out of his sight. The other one's name was Al-Sad, and he spent most of his time lurking about watching Farmy. My guess is he wanted that box.
Sounds like you had your hands full.
I haven't even told you about the fight yet between Mr. Weatherby and Mr. Urubaru.
Over what?
Weatherby's wife, I'd say, though they were a tight-lipped lot about it.
I see. Tell me, Lieutenant, we understand that you were the first person to discover the body.
Yes, sir, I was. Captain Ramsey sent me down to inspect the hold. And I went immediately over to them Egyptian crates. Professor Winterbank was particularly anxious about him, you know.
Could you describe the scene as you remember it?
I'll never forget it. I just made my way to the back of the hold, and I noticed at the top of them crates, the one what carried the mummy's coffin was raised up kind of funny like. The coffin lid was laid off to one side, and there was Mr. Weatherby, all sprawled on the floor next to a bowl of ashes. He'd been strangled by a length of the mummy's sheeting. It was bloody gruesome, I tell you. Poor bloke's eyes popped out like a couple of sausages on a hot iron skillet.
Quite a vivid picture, don't you agree, Holmes?
Quite. And you reported this to Captain Ramsey straight away?
Absolutely. In fact, the captain put me in charge of the entire investigation.
And what did you discover? Did anybody have any contact with Weatherby on the night of the murder?
Not that I know of. I could account for all the crew. The passengers were in their cabins as far as anyone knew or would say. Nobody saw anything, heard anything, or knew anything. Besides, Weatherby was seasick from the beginning. He stayed pretty much in his cabin all the time. Maybe that's why the lovely young Mrs. Weatherby was gallivanting about.
With Urubaru?
Yes, indeed.
And what of the bowl? Where is it now?
The bowl?
With the ashes.
Oh, yes. You know, now that you mention it, I don't recall ever seeing it again.
Hello? Is anyone there? Mr. Farmy, are you at home?
Apparently so, Watson. Look.
Oh, what ghastly business. Everyone will assume the mummy has struck again.
Hardly a plausible assumption. This poor fellow has a knife in his back and not a scrap of sheeting about his neck.
How very observant, Holmes.
Ring up Scotland Yard. This case is simple enough for them to solve.
You've solved it already.
Elementary, my dear Watson. Obviously, it was the butler.
Butler? What butler?
Exactly my point. A man as wealthy as Akram Farmi would always have a manservant about him. After the foul deed, this one obviously beat a hasty retreat.
Terribly sorry. It seems you need to...
Well, well. If it isn't Mr. Sherlock Holmes, London's most overly praised amateur sleuth, needing the help of the Yard again.
Are you going to stand for that, Holmes?
What did you learn, Watson?
Not a thing.
If this is an inconvenient time, perhaps I could come back, Mr. Uruburu.
I wouldn't hear of it. Just a bit of a hangover. I've weathered plenty worse than this.
I'm investigating the death of Andrew Weatherby. You were on the ship with him out of Cairo. Did you happen to make his acquaintance?
Weatherby, a most tedious fellow.
So tedious, one might want to do him in.
Don't be preposterous. In my condition, I couldn't have done anything of the sort.
What condition was that?
And I thought you were a great detective. The first night out, a few of us threw a bit of a bash that went on until we docked in London.
Did Mrs. Weatherby attend this particular bash?
She was the guest of honor, you might say.
I'm very sorry to intrude on you in your moment of grief.
Oh, that's quite all right. You know, Andrew and I haven't been married.
Oh, look. There is a note on the door that says that they will be out all afternoon.
So you've been reading my articles in the Times. I'm honored. What do you think?
Pettigrew wrote this book over 50 years ago, and there's still nothing better on the subject. Fascinating.
How unlucky. No one seems to be around.
What did you learn, Watson?
Not a thing. Terribly sorry. It's
Mr. Turnbull apparently left what little he had to the Egyptology department at London University. And Windbank left everything to his wife Hildegard.
It's quite amusing, all this hoopla over a mummy's curse, I must.
Pity. It appears that no one is...
how unfortunate. There's not a soul in sight.
Pity.
All this way and not a clue to help us solve this. I've rung the bell a half-dozen times.
I can't believe we came all this... Pity. It appears that no one is in. Pity. It appears that no one is in.
Hello? Is anyone there? Mr. Harney, are you at home?
Apparently so, Watson.
How unfortunate. There's not a soul in sight. All this way and not a clue to help us solve.
What did you learn, Watson?
Not a thing.
If this is an inconvenient time, perhaps I could come back, Mr. Uruburu.
Let me tell you, a murder, even by a 4,000-year-old mummy, was only...
All this way and not a clue to help us solve this case. How terribly disappointing.
What did you learn, Watson?
Not a... Terribly sorry. It seems you need to turn up a clue or so more before the case can be judged. Please do continue. How unfortunate. There's not a soul in sight.
Pity. What did you learn, Watson? What did you learn, Watson?
Not a thing, Holmes.
You learned nothing?
Don't get testy, Holmes. There wasn't anyone about.
My humble apologies, Watson. I can't...
Society burglar strikes again. Series of burglaries. 6 over the period from June 2nd to